Perez, and my topic is comprehensive sex education for LGBTQ students. So getting right into it, we're going to go to our key terms. Our first one is contraception, which is any method or device used to prevent pregnancy. So that could be condoms, birth control, the pill or injection, kind of anything similar. Then we have STDs or STIs, which are any sexually transmitted diseases that came from sexual experiences. So that could be like vaginal sex, anal or oral. And then sexual orientation, which is who you're attracted to romantically or sexually. So those, for most people, terms kind of go with that. So there's gay, lesbian, bi, pan, all of the sorts. And then we have comprehensive sex education, which is a type of teaching that encourages kids or informs kids on how to make healthy choices in their sexual and personal lives. And then finally, we have abstinence-only education, which is a type of education that encourages students to postpone sex till marriage and kind of teaches them that sex is scary instead of like a good thing for them. So moving on to chapter 1, which is my background and history. Comprehensive sex education was originally kind of denied because of the fear of sex education, which is the belief that teaching kids sex education only encourages them and teaches them to have sex instead of how to do it safely and properly. And from there, that was when abstinence only became created or introduced in 1981 when Congress passed the Adolescents Family Life Act, which was kind of, in other words, abstinence only, and it was encouraging them again to not have sex till marriage. Comprehensive sex education was introduced in the 1950s, but it wasn't until the early 2000s that it started being, well, abstinence only started being reformed, and comprehensive sex education started being introduced into schools. Moving on to my demographics, fewer than 5% of LGBT students have reported having sex education classes with LGBTQ topics. 19% of schools across the country include inclusive sex education, and 38% of high schools teach 19 of the CDC topics for comprehensive sex education. This kind of just shows that many LGBTQ students around the country, not only in Connecticut, are experiencing a lack of education that they deserve. Moving on to society. LGBTQ students lose out on a lot of vital information regarding their sexual education or even just information for their personal lives or their relationships. Due to this, they suffer more consequences or are at a higher risk of consequences that their peers may not get, more specifically their peers not part of the LGBTQ. So this can include LGBTQ students having earlier sexual experiences and having more partners than their peers, like sexual partners. This also can result in them facing more STDs and STIs and just a lot of negative experiences that their peers don't get to experience. For policy, there have been states that include and implement LGBTQ sex education into schools. Some of those states are California, Colorado, New Jersey, Oregon, Rhode Island, and Washington. And there have also been states that ban LGBTQ comprehensive sex education, and some of those are Delaware, Iowa, Massachusetts, South Carolina, and Wisconsin. So my personal connection, this picture to the left is me and my mom, and then the one to the right is my uncle and I. My mom, pretty much when I was growing up, she worked at Planned Parenthood for 8 to 9 years, so I grew up being fortunately taught of my sex education and how to take care of myself and what to do, what not to do. She taught me that, or she showed me that not everybody gets to experience that. So knowing that, I wanted to take what I knew and double it and benefit people from it. My uncle, I grew up very close to my uncle, and he is gay. And I remember when I was growing up, my family made it seem like it was a huge secret and that he was something different, and I didn't want people to feel that way, whether that was just of themselves or in their education or just their life. So for my statement of problem, my context is schools in Connecticut commonly overlook LGBTQ sex education. It could be because they don't find it important, they don't agree with it, anything of the sort. This leads to a lack of resources and knowledge in LGBTQ students, and it is significant for a social justice issue because it results in a disparity or inequity of education among students, specifically LGBTQ students. So for my framework, the primary issue is lack of resources and knowledge, which impacts LGBTQ students negatively because it provides them with negative opportunities, and when they are put in situations, they are not properly equipped for dealing with them. And that also it shows the harm that their lack of education gives to them and how significant and vital their education is. So in hopes of minimizing that, there's a series of lessons and videos and workshops to make the students more knowledgeable on themselves and their education and sex education and how it plays into their daily lives to make healthy decisions. And when or upon completed, students will feel more knowledgeable and confident in their learning, and they can feel that they know or they're equipped in making healthy decisions to maintain a healthy lifestyle. So moving to chapter 2, my literature review. For my research questions, my essential question was, how can a series of seminars improve the lack of knowledge regarding LGBTQ topics? For my first sub-question, it is, what is the status of students' knowledge prior to the treatments? This sub-question kind of focuses on the students or the sample's understanding before we get into it to kind of develop where I should go afterwards and develop my action plan. For the second sub-question, it's what is the status of students' knowledge during the treatments, which just kind of show where the students are, but it also provides me with ideas that I should change or critique or include to make their education better. And for my final sub-question, it is what is the status of the students' knowledge after the treatments, which shows me if they grew or if the project failed. But it also provides me insight on what I could have done differently or what people could do differently in the future. So for my first case study, first case study written by Cameron, I'm not sure how to pronounce the last name, I'm going to say Shawan. The purpose was to see if there was a connection between inclusive or exclusive sex education and the discrimination faced by LGBTQ students. This case study specifically helped me support the need to implement comprehensive sex education in schools because it showed that there was a connection between inclusive and exclusive education. When there is inclusive education, students primarily do better and they have a more welcoming environment and a positive experience. When there is an exclusive education, students tend to feel less happier and they experience more harassment or bullying from their peers. So this kind of helped me understand what the right or wrong thing could be to make them feel. Moving on to my second case study. This one, written by Dylan Landy, supports the need or supports the effectiveness of comprehensive sex education. So this one helps me illustrate the benefits of comprehensive sex education and why it should be implemented or used and how it benefits students. My third case study, written by David Dyer, supports making teaching environments more welcoming and supportive for LGBTQ students. This one helped me because it shows why environment is as important as curriculum. If students don't feel supported or welcomed in their environment, they don't feel the need or the want to learn. So it is just as important to make their environment positive and welcoming as their education. The fourth case study, written by Bethy Lenari, supports utilizing different methods in comprehensive sex education. So this one primarily focused on democratic policies, which in schools are kind of, put it in simple terms, are kind of like a liberal type of teaching. So it focuses on like cultural liberalism and feminism and just makes learning more about attitudes than like books. So this one just supports utilizing different types of methods or practices during the study. This one is not as beneficial because as much as it can help the education, it can also harm the education. So it all necessarily depends on what exactly you're giving to the students. For the final case study, written by Carly Reeves, this one supports, or the purpose of this study was to support the need for additional research regarding comprehensive sex education. So for my project or my action plan, this supported kind of the whole plan overall because it provided reasons and explanations as to why comprehensive sex education is needed in schools. So moving on to our chapter 3, my chapter 3. These are my consultants, Cadence Tiffany and Kyle Perry. Cadence is a educator at the Triangle Community Center, sorry. And they are a part of the LGBTQ as well as an educator. Mr. Perry is a health illuminator here at Capital Prep, and I kind of chose them because they are able to educate but keep it personal and connected to the students, which I think is important to retain information for them. Moving on to my treatments. My first treatment was a brief discussion with the students, which my sample was the entire 12th grade. And it was about the topic, comprehensive sex education, and what it is and what it can do in their lives. It was held March 30th, and the health periods 4 and 5. And after the discussion, there was a survey sent out to the sample to understand where they're at and to see if there was anything they wanted to know on top of what I was giving them to make it more connected and personal. Here are some pictures from it. On the left is period 5. The right is period 4. Everybody kind of spoke in and asked questions, which was very, very helpful to understand what they needed to know. Moving into the second treatment. This one was a slideshow that spoke about 5 different comprehensive sex education topics suggested by the CDC. And it was held April 13th, again during periods 4 and 5. This one was primarily to educate them. I wanted to keep it interesting, but I also wanted to get to the point of educating them out there, and I felt like that was most important. So from treatment 2, again it was in periods 4 and 5. The left is 5, the right is 4. For this one, Mr. Perry was very helpful in this one. This one was more of a collaboration with him in comparison to the first treatment. And that moves me to the third treatment, which was a video sent in from my second consultant, Cadence, but edited by me to make it personal and interesting because it was very difficult bringing in Cadence with all the things that were going on. But this conducted was May 4th, and again during periods 4 and 5. This one was, I wanted to make the information personal because for the first survey it was asked of them to give any topics that they find important that they didn't get to learn. So this treatment I wanted to focus on that and make it personal to their learning. So I had Cadence speak because she can speak to them through a personal and educational standpoint. So here's a video for pictures. There is Cadence projecting. The video was around 7 minutes long, and it was broken up into different chunks, and with each chunk transition there was a discussion about each chunk to make sure that the students were learning and retaining the information. For my big event, it was another video, but this time it was like kind of an advertisement, in my words, for comprehensive sex education. It was around 30 seconds long, and it introduced comprehensive sex education, how it was, and what it could be used for. This took place June 3rd, and it was played in not periods 4 and 5, might have been 5, where all the seniors were together and it was projected. Then this was done to provide any information, final information that might have gotten lost on the way or anything that they just didn't pick up. And it was supposed to be entertaining and interesting so they could bring it with them. So the video is there. But to the right, there was also a pledge that went around. I did it digitally on my iPad, and it basically pledged for the students to practice safe sex and make healthy decisions in their lives. Not everybody was present to sign it, but I did get a good amount of signatures, and I think that's what counts. So for my broader awareness, I chose Instagram, social media. My goal for my social media was to keep it informative, but make it look nice, because that is what draws people in when things look nice or look pretty, and then that's what hooks them in, is because they like what they're seeing. Yeah, didn't make much posts, but the ones I did make spoke about sex education and how it plays in their lives and what it can do for them. Moving on to my chapter 4. So for my pre-treatments, there was a survey that went out, and I had gotten 28 responses back. The questions highlighted are the questions that I focused on primarily that showed the most growth. So for example, there was a question that asked if they had felt they learned vital information regarding their sex education. Only 37% of students said yes. So that showed me that there was definitely adjustments and improvements to be made. For my during one, this survey kind of focused on their confidence and knowledge during the treatments. So I was able to learn how effective the treatments were being, what I could have changed, what I could have added, anything of the sorts. So when looking at this table for the first question, how to access valid and reliable products and services relating to STDs, it was definitely 50-50. Some students did feel they had growth, some students felt they didn't have growth. So that showed me that I needed to do better for the next treatment to make sure everybody was included and equal met to. Post survey, this one also primarily focused on 5 questions that show engagement and growth throughout the treatments and surveys and seminars. So this one asks them to rank their confidence in their learning and knowledge of comprehensive sex education through 1 through 5, 1 being least confident, 5 being most confident in their learning. In comparison to the first and second surveys, it did show growth when going back to if they felt they learned vital information regarding their health. The number changed to 65.4% of them felt they had learned information regarding their health. So it does prove that there was growth and they were effective. So for chapter 5, my conclusion, my inferences that first one, the participants prior to the study did not either care enough about comprehensive sex education or they didn't know enough about comprehensive sex education to care about it. So they showed me that they needed to be educated on the topic, but also just overall introduced to it. During the study, participants did show more engagement and knowledge and care in the subject. They were asking questions and they were giving their undivided attention to it, and they were showing that this was something they cared about. At the end of the study, or the treatments, participants felt more confident in their learning regarding comprehensive sex education. They felt as if they had learned things that connected to them, and it wasn't just something they would forget about in like a month. It was something that they could retain if needed. For those 3, it all answers my essential question, as a series of seminars can improve the lack of knowledge regarding comprehensive sex education. It more so depends on how you do it and how connected and personal you make it. For my policy recommendations, surveys for evaluating students' knowledge and growth should continue to be utilized, as it efficiently and effectively shows you what the students think and believe as a collective and makes it more comprehensive for you to understand. As well as capital prep should implement education, whether that's a class or a curriculum in the health classes. It should be implemented as students. It is shown that this is something students need, and it is something they're not yet. So for my research recommendations, for mine, well, my study, I chose seniors only. For the future, I think it would be beneficial to add a mix of 9th and 11th graders to make the education more broad. And even though our seniors deserve that education, they are leaving soon, and I think it is important to keep the students here educated on that as well, because they will be, especially 9th and 10th grade, will be progressing into health class as the years move on. So it is important to keep that comprehensive sex education alive to make them fully aware of it. As well as there should be different methods used, and those methods should be always examined to be determined as effective or not. The methods I did might not be effective for every single study or every single school, and I think it is important to evaluate the methods I use and different people use to find out which ones are most relevant and not relevant. My limitations, kind of planning with cadence, because they're not far but a good distance away, so finding time to bring them in with the schedule, and around that time there was map testing. It was tricky to bring them in at a time that would be beneficial and useful for us and them and just the project overall, as well as lack of full participation. As much as there were students who did participate and engage, there were students who didn't want to engage. That could be a limitation to my study, because it could impact my numbers, it could impact the data, but it also impacts the purpose of the study, which is teaching them. So if students aren't participating, then they're not being informed and educated properly. And finally, lack of organization. This was a personal, like, researcher issue, but as time had progressed, there were schedule issues and all the sorts, so it did play into the project. Here are some of my references. And there we go.
And let our panelists get their notes together, and they'll be able to get some clarity on some things they would like to ask you questions on. You did a great job. I definitely enjoyed the presentation style.
Thank you.
All the colors and colorful condoms. Yes, absolutely.
Professor Pringle.
Hi, Lay.
Hi.
First of all, great job presenting. Great pacing, great articulation of your slides. You definitely have a wealth of knowledge on this topic, and it shows that you're passionate about it. So, great job there. Specifically, like, as you were doing your research, or you identify that there was a need for greater topic or focus on comprehensive sex education for this community of students, did you find that currently in course offerings, there's not maybe topics or things that are specific to the LGBTQ plus community, and that's kind of where you found the need and wanted to expand?
Yes, it was. The topics are similar, but they're not specific. So it talks generally about STDs and pregnancy and relationships, but it doesn't speak about how there's different relationships for LGBTQ and non-LGBTQ, and how their type of contraception or their version of it might not be the same for us or LGBTQ students, because there's many different types of students.
And did you find that your consultant was able to kind of bridge that gap and help you get that information out to
Yeah, both of them actually. Cadence was more beneficial, I would say, because they are part of the LGBTQ, so they understand first-handedly what it could feel like. So it was really helpful for me and the project overall, just having them speak to them, because they understood it.
My last question, what was student attitude and openness towards this topic like? Like, what was your experience with that?
It was actually very positive, and when I had to present or just kind of speak to everybody, they were very understanding, and they understood that it was something that was not only important to me, but it was very important to them as well. And the students were very, I'm trying to think of the words, I'm gonna take my time. They were very flexible and active to participate.
Those are all my questions.
Yep.
Okay.
If you're ready, now you go.
No, I'm good. Leilani, couple questions. So we're a social justice school, right? What's the recommendation you have for us as a school to kind of address this topic?
To address it or like implement it?
Both.
Okay. I think it should be not necessarily its own thing. I think it should be gradually introduced, like health classes. Our health classes are, I think, specifically right now, only for 11th and 12th grade. I think there should be ways to include it into the lower grades. When I was making my big event video, I couldn't, originally I wanted to have it to the advisories, but I couldn't because of the younger grades, which is understandable, but I think because the upper school has 7th and 8th grade, it's important to include them in that education as well. So I think it's for us, or what we can do is gradually introduce it and make it subjective to each grade and student.
And you chose seniors, right?
Yes.
How come you didn't choose any other? Is it because of health class specifically, or?
It was that, but I also knew that many of the seniors have been here for 2 years and up, and I felt that they better understood Capital Prep's education specifically for health. So it was kind of more easier because of health, but it also was, I knew that because they had been here for so long, there was a greater chance that they didn't receive what they needed.
Specifically, because my question is more there's a lot of people that are part of that community in the school, right? Mm-hmm. So how could you have gotten them to be part of your project?
Like just everybody who was a part, or just?
It's not everybody, but I know there's a good chunk of our students who identify as part of that community who could have used this information. Mm-hmm. So how do you think you could have gotten them to be part of your project?
I think for that, I maybe did have an LGBTQ group here at the school for a while. I'm not sure what happened to that, but for making it more inclusive for them, because they primarily needed more, I could have worked with that group. I know Cadence also organized that LGBTQ group and organized the people. I could have spoken to them about it to make it more broad for them.
Hi there, Nani.
Hi.
First of all, I just want to say you did a great job presenting. I definitely agree with what Ms. Pringle said about confidence, and I was very impressed with how you spoke about the information without reading from your flashcards. You didn't read verbatim. I mean, you physically knew the information, and I think that's such a great thing. Question for you. Did you consider looking into any other schools within Bridgeport or Connecticut to see if there's any other programs, or how many schools are offering this particular type of health education or support for LGBT community? Did you consider doing that?
Honestly, I didn't. I kept the study very limited to Capital Prep, not for a specific reason, just more so that I knew that these were people around me that I could work with and communicate easily if I needed to.
So I do think that you probably could reach out to see just within the community how many other schools are physically teaching sex education to LGBT community to kind of bring in some data to her project.
Or even what curriculums
or what curriculum
LGBT.
Yeah, I just kind of think that's specific that you probably could have included. Just future reference. And then you mentioned that states expand sex education, I feel like you could have provided more information as to the findings, like figuring out like why did they do this, you know, because this is important, right? To, you know, especially people, or not people, but especially to scholars and students of, you know, 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th grade, 12th grade, right? And even younger, because I mean, I'm just saying, right? You have more and more students now that are even in elementary school that should be educated, right? To prevent some things from happening. So did you consider or maybe look into why they banned it? You know what I'm saying?
I did actually, and that for primarily the main reason I could find was homophobia, whether that was projected homophobia or internalizing homophobia. Many places or people feel that teaching comprehensive sex education for LGBTQ only encourages like homosexual behavior is the word that was described. So a lot of it could be, or a lot of it is fear or just overall disagreement of LGBTQ education and lifestyle.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then you mentioned that you could have, you said in your post survey, you mentioned that there are some things that you could have changed. What would you have changed?
I think I would have changed the activities I did. I didn't do enough activities to further encourage retaining the information, which is why I believe that not all students felt confident in their learning. I presented I presented information to them and I taught them things, but I don't think I did enough interactive activities to really retain it and make them feel more confident.
Okay. All right. And then as far as your videos, did you have any videos from your consultants where you physically recorded the videos, or just you just had the consultants come and just speak while you guys were in the treatment?
For Mr. Perry, he was like raw in person speaking. Cadence was, they recorded a video at the community center for me, and it was talking about the topics sent in from the students.
Okay. And I think Ms. James asked you, the students, how did they react? Did you find that they were very like open, like for your treatment, right? What findings or outcomes did you see? Did you see that they felt like it was very helpful to them? Were they talkative about the topic, or were they still kind of refined or reserved and kind of shy about the topic? What did you find?
I found, or I noticed that when I first began, there were some students who were not uncomfortable, but hesitant on learning about the topic. Primarily, unfortunately, a lot of our male students, they were hesitant on learning about like gay sex and all of that, which is understandable but unfortunate. As treatments progressed and the seminars progressed, they became more open and welcoming. It was actually many of our male students who ended up asking a lot of the questions and participating more in the service.
That's all. Thank you.
Excellent job, Ilani. If you want to step outside, our panel will now
Do you want to add?
match witness.
I do. Thank you. You're welcome. Sorry.